Welcome to Skills 101. Today isn't a demo, it's a real conversation. We've got three Quest experts, each with deep real-world experience and equally big personalities, breaking down what actually happens when Active Directory goes down and what the fallout looks like after an attack. This is based on the field, not theory. Jump into the Q&A as we go. We want this to be interactive. Let's get started.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Joe, and I am responsible for professional services and incident response here at Quest. Hiram, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm Bryan Heimer. I'm a solutions architect with Quest. I've been here for a long time. My focus is Recovery Manager DRE. So excited to be here. Patton?
Yeah, and I'm Brian Patton. I'm a security journalist based out of Texas, and I've been here 24 years or so. So seen lots of changes.
That's a really long time. Hey,
It is a
so
long time.
listen, it's kind of snowy and nasty here. We have a story about recovery in a blizzard. So let's start with that, just because it's going to make me feel like it's actually tied into what I'm doing today. Bring back fun memories.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I hope it doesn't get to a blizzard state for you because that was pretty gnarly. So we had
Yeah.
a customer, manufacturer customer here in the States, I think up in Michigan, and they had a ransomware attack, kind of unique because it was just one domain of a 5 domain forest got hit with ransomware. And they had tried to do some other things in the configuration node, some deep stuff, before they finally called us because they really needed to recover. And we did. We recovered that domain, and recovery worked just great. But right in the middle of it, the power went out at the guy that we were working with at his house. And so literally he took his laptop and he went out to his truck in the driveway and fired it up and plugged his laptop into the lighter and used his cell phone from his truck. And he sat in his truck. I'm glad the heater worked in his truck, and finished the recovery process in his truck in the blizzard. It was pretty hilarious. The domain recovery for them was successful, but they did have to sort out some of the things that they were trying to do before they recovered. I think in my opinion, forest recovery, just recovering the entire forest, may have been faster for them, but that's what they decided to do, and our product helped them out. So,
But I think that one also calls out the importance of the sort of the procedure that goes around it. The people, when do you declare an emergency, right? When do you call in for help? When do you call for backup? And do you have all of the other tertiary things, not just like the software to help you recover, not just the backups, right? But all of the procedures and who do we call and who does what in the case of an emergency? Because I think those are like those are the things that really make it go faster, as you said, right? Had we decided earlier to pull the trigger, we'd have been back up and running faster.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
and I think it takes a special type of in that moment ability to say, I'm the expert. Let's move forward. And I know we have a story about that as well. That sort of separation of, well, look, you're not, my job's not on the line at the moment. It's sort of a unique thing we can do, right, Brad? So, Pat, what's your thought on that? That I know you'll probably have some thoughts on a single individual there calling in from his truck.
Yeah, that's a weakness in the organization itself. That's not being very resilient. You're not able to withstand and respond because human beings will be involved. That one human being has a problem. Well, now that personal resilience issue is affecting the different organization. So a big takeaway I have is get multiple people so they actually have muscle memory as to what they're doing. Mr. Heimer will tell people exactly what to do, but we need to have multiple people involved.
Okay, I totally agree with you, Brian. But in this client's defense, and I know we're not mentioning any names here, we had about 6 people on the call. This is the guy that was doing the recovery. So there were other people there, but I totally agree. If you're not practicing recovery so that you're ready for these scenarios, you're making a mistake. You need to practice recovery, and it needs to be at least annually. I would say semi-annually, like twice a year. I know, Brian, you think even more than that until the process is nailed down.
Yeah, I want people to
Right.
actually throw something on somebody's lap, have them test out a different situation, because then you're thinking logically, you have a little bit of muscle memory. Because when these different incidents happen, there's a lot of emotions that happen. People will freeze. So we got to make sure they're able to push through instead of freezing.
They will, and I feel like
Totally true.
when you're doing those tests, it's not only important to have like more than one test per year, but it's also important to have different scenarios, right? Different things can go wrong,
For sure.
and there's got to be a tone in that recovery that we're handing off between experts, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And I think
We're
Bryan, you've got a story about like, oh well, will you let me, like I'm not at risk here. Will you let me talk and do my thing? I think that's a good story to sort of
Yeah, let's go into that
exemplify.
one. Isn't that next on our list, Joe?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's do that. So we had another manufacturer. This one was a global manufacturer. They 17 DCs around the globe. This happened. I think this happened in 2020. The We didn't have we have a couple features now that actually partially came out of this, and that is our secure storage feature and our cloud storage feature, which can protect your backups even if there's a ransomware attack. And those weren't even in the product yet. So this customer kind of lucked out because one of their DCs did not get encrypted, and they don't really know why. But they were able to isolate that machine on the network from the rest of the network. And so if they were going to get encrypted, or if it was going to be attacked, the attackers lost their foothold on that machine. That machine was also doing system state backups. So I'd never tell you not to do backups in many sorts. Defense in depth is a really important thing. And we were able to restore system state on that machine. And here's where the story gets a little bit funny. Um, uh, we do the system state restore after about 4 hours of them fighting the virus. The CIO comes on afterwards and he goes, "Okay, so we've got this machine restored. Let's bring it back on the network, and we'll see if we can get our manufacturing back online, and then we can start worrying about business applications." And I kind of virtually raised my hand in the room and I said, "Hey, Bryan Heimer from Quest. All due respect, sir, we're not going to do that." And he was like, "Okay," because I figured, he can't fire me, right? So I could take those types of risks, and I think that's another reason why you should have somebody come in as a consultant that can do these things and make these decisions. Because I think as an employee, I'd be worried about my paycheck, and as a consultant, I'm a little bit insulated from those sorts of things. But
And
what we did instead, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot. What we did instead is bring in a couple other servers into that bubble of a network, and on one of them we installed Recovery Manager, and then we took an Active Directory backup of the DC that we had just restored from system state, and then we used that Active Directory backup to recover what we call our Clean OS recovery onto another machine in that bubble. And that's the machine we brought on the network. As far as the first machine, we shut it down, told them to give it to their forensics team. For all we know, it was the command and control server for the attack, and we didn't want it to ever see the light of day again. So,
now, Brian, wasn't this one of the different accounts where they had a managed service provider involved helping them out as well? And they had what, 80 or 90 people on that initial hotline where there's communication chaos happening as well?
yes, yep, it was. And I don't know if it's an MSP, Bryan, or an outsourcer for their IT. I don't know which way I'd describe that. But yeah, right at the start of recovery, and you bring up a good point. Right at the start of recovery, we're just starting to hit the go button, and this guy gets on the phone and he goes, "Listen, I've got a couple machines. I need to get them restored." And he started like monopolizing the time. And I said, "Hey, it's Bryan Heimer with Quest. I understand your concerns and your importance, but you need to be quiet because we're starting recovery for the forest, and none of you are going to get up if we don't get the forest up." So again, they can't fire me. I'm just there to help them with the best advice.
Another interesting tidbit I remember from that one is responsibilities and the contract and whatnot. 'Cause you're dealing with another different provider. So at the C level, they're trying to figure out, well, is it our people responsible for doing it? Is it their responsibility for doing this? All the while, time is going on and they're still down.
And
So
money
I
is
think I
going,
remember
yeah, money is
commending
going
you on
out the
that
drain.
one where you actually told them, hey, we can't do identity. We can't restore those other business applications. So there's an order of operations we have to be able to do. So there's different people that need to be able to communicate outside of the larger scope because everybody was getting involved. Everybody wants to be able to help. There's a lot of noise you start hearing.
Yeah, and Bryan, you bring up another good point because the other thing you really need to have in your recovery plan is who has the authority to pull the trigger, right? To say it's go time, do this. And that wasn't well described within this company either. And so the chief officer that was there, he was a little afraid to say, okay, let's go, because they were kind of hobbling along. They were really in trouble. They weren't going to
Well, it's
survive. But
it,
but
if
he
you're
didn't want to
anywhere
say
close to
go.
that, though, right? Like anytime you're close to this scenario, is all of these incidents that we respond to, they're all very emotional for the folks involved, right? Because there's, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so much wrapped up in it. Like it's a technically complicated situation, right? Regardless of why we're involved in this incident, but it's also an emotionally fraught one. And so having those things documented, this is our process, this is the role that's responsible for communication, these are our communication standards, all of those things as part of your business continuity or your disaster recovery planning. And then, Bryan, I know you talk about this a ton, right? The exercising that, right? Because I feel like when we exercise those with customers, a lot of times what we see is they'll have an aha moment of, oh, I'm not the right person to do that. Or, like, well, if I don't have an Active Directory login, how do I do that? Right? There's all of those things that happen during those exercises that really lend to better operations the next day. But also, if there is an event, when there is an event, it's a much faster recovery.
Yeah, I remember sitting with Mr. Heimer at a large transportation organization, and I asked the question, if this thing did happen, who has the authority to make that different decision? And they even shared one of the different assumptions. One of the people in there, we had the IAM group in there, like, well, I'm assuming it's the CISO. And the CISO was involved, like, well, I don't know. Like, well, you better go ahead and figure that stuff out. Let's start having those different conversations because I've learned in a lot of these different disaster recovery exercises, many assumptions are made. And we all know what
Mhm.
happens when you assume something.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's totally true. And I think that as you're building that plan and as you identify those roles, there needs to be insulation, right? If the person you've given the authority to pull the trigger pulls the trigger and things don't really work, it doesn't need to become a resume updating event for him, right? He needs to be able to do that comfortably enough that, he's not going to withhold starting recovery because he's afraid to lose his job if it fails, right? That's
Which often implies someone who is not at the organizational level of performing the recovery, right? Like this is
right.
very odd. This is a leadership decision. This is a business event, and recovering needs to be addressed as a business event.
Yeah.
Even if all the steps
Yeah.
are technical, what we're talking about is a loss of business, and that's a big deal, right?
Yeah. Let me share a little bit more about the recovery and how it ran. The first machine that we actually recovered took about an hour, and that's not normal for us. But what they had done is the target server they gave us had been hardened. And so we had to tell the hardening software that our process was allowed to do things like install ADDS and promote the server to be a DC and all of that. So we had to work around those issues. The second phase, we did two phase twos with them. The second phase was just another machine in another building in the same city. That took 12 minutes. The third phase, the second run of the second phase, was three machines, two of which were across the Pacific Ocean from the first one. And that took about 36 minutes for those three machines to be up. And then we left them. We talked to them 2 weeks later. They had about 10 of their 17 DCs up, but it wasn't because they needed more. It was, that was enough infrastructure and they had to focus on other stuff. And then they had a second forest that they never recovered. I don't know if they ever did. It still wasn't up. They didn't have recovery managers, so they had to do that process manually, and I don't know if they ever restored it.
Yeah, and I remember there was another one you were working on years ago, Bryan, where the longest part of the recovery was establishing their ESXi infrastructure to be able to restore into. So thinking about what's happening in the world, if that information and infrastructure was actually tainted, it's always good to have enough flexible options to be able to restore to Azure, IaaS, or somewhere else. You have to start
Hmm.
considering what would I do if this is not available, or if I don't trust this target infrastructure. If you have something
Yeah, and
affecting the different BIOS, you probably are not going to trust that different physical hardware. So the more
true.
options you have is going to be better off for you.
And we are really platform or infrastructure agnostic. We do allow you to recover a physical server to a VM, or a physical server to the cloud, or a VM to the cloud. If it's Azure, we can even provision those servers for you in the product. Even on-prem, if you have an on-prem VM host that you've started, we can provision Hyper-V or ESX on-prem. But if you're using something else like AWS or GCP, you just have to stand up target servers first, and that's a pretty quick process as well.
But I know we talked about some examples of that, and I do think it's a good segue, Brian, because a lot of what we're seeing in our incident response practice today really is like there's a lot more attacks on the VM at that layer, right? So let's talk about. I know, like I said, we prepped an example that customer we could talk about. Let's talk about that now.
Yeah, so there's several of them actually that kind of fall into this realm. One of the things that we came up with from that last client was, okay, we need to be able to protect our backups, right? Because to be honest, their recovery manager server got encrypted in the attack, and so really, like I said, they lucked out because of this one DC. And so we developed two things. We developed a feature called secure storage, and we developed another one called cloud storage. And cloud storage is just leveraging AWS S3 storage or Azure Blob storage, both of which you can set when you build a container in them. You can set immutability. So whatever you put in there is going to stay there until the policy expires, whatever you set, whatever date period, probably Tombstone lifetime. Secure storage is an on-premises server, and it's just a Windows server, but we firewall it so that you cannot reach it from the network. There's one TLS encrypted port that stays open that we push the backups through to it, and those backups will stay there until the policy you set on that machine when you set it up. And then when another backup comes in, that's when we enforce the policy and remove something. So if backups stop, you're not going to lose anything on secure storage. But I do have a manufacturer that we had that story with, and and it was a great story. It's a client that I've known for years and years and years. He wanted this secure storage right away, and this was 2021. If you guys remember back then, it was hard to get new hardware. We always tell
Oh
you
yeah.
don't run this on a VM, right? Because if your VM host gets attacked, and really a lot of ransomware attacks will attack ESX, especially
Yeah.
Hyper-V. Obviously, it's Windows. So if you're running on a VM host, any VM is going to be vulnerable. But he wanted it right away, and he couldn't get a hold of hardware, so we put it on a VM. And that was in August 2021. Marchish 2022, he gets hit with Conti ransomware, and that's one of the groups that does attack ESX hosts. So he was fortunately in the computer room when this happened, and he said, Bryan, he goes, I saw other machines, other VM hosts starting to get attacked and going down. I walked over to the machine I knew had my secure storage server on it, and I powered it off. I didn't even try to shut it down. I just powered it off because I was not going to lose my backups. So lucky for him. But that's why we say a physical server.
And Brian, I'll add to that. I mean, I think we've all heard the saying, one is none and two
Right.
is one. This is why I personally like to have as many options as available. Having that physical location go to and get that file to do the restoration is great, but physical disasters do happen, which is why I always advocate using that as well as the cloud options with the immutability bit set. But keep in mind, internet's not always available. So it's really good having those different options because you need to have the flexibility based on what's happening in the world at that given point in time.
Right. I totally agree, Bryan. And with our product, you can write something to secure storage and to cloud storage and to more than one container or platform in cloud storage. So you can have several options there. So
And
Really
that is something
important.
I like a lot about what we do, right? Is that there's a lot, we have the options, right? During that incident, during that sort of restoration effort, we have the ability to choose a different approach or a different restoration method if it's appropriate. We don't have sort of this one side, like, this is the way it works. You got to deal with that, right? There's
Yeah,
options
exactly.
so that the restoration is the most appropriate for the incident that we're responding to, right?
And that's a great point too, Joe, because that was the scenario here. The client actually was fighting the ransomware attack when it happened, and they are actually able to kick him out the door before they lost even one of their domains. They had about 50 DCs. I'm looking at my notes over here, and they lost about two fifths of that. So they had dozens of machines they had to bring back, but they didn't lose a domain. So we do
20.
recovery in what's called
That
phase
was
one and
good.
phase two.
2/5
Hmm?
is 20. You just did like that math in your head with the weird face.
Yeah, yeah, roughly.
2/5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Good.
so so they normally we do phase one and phase two, and in phase one you're restoring these from backup. And
Okay.
then in phase two, you're promoting new servers to take the place of those DCs you didn't restore from backup. They went straight to phase two. And our product wasn't really built to go straight to phase two at that point. Now it is. Now you can do that. But we had to do some under the covers things to allow them to run phase two without phase one. That it just shows, we're evolving this product as well. So we've built secure storage and cloud storage, and now we've built this ability to run phase two without phase one. We're constantly developing to make this product better.
And Brian, I'm going to hit back on flexibility because I know there's been an example too where we're doing a recovery, there's new stuff added to the environment. So often, like maybe you have this new EDR type tool on your different domain controllers post breach because you want to make sure that you're reclaiming your network and getting control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes those EDRs block different things from occurring. So I think there was an instance where we had to do that pause and recovery to fix something. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was the client I talked about earlier where they hardened the server before they handed it to us. And so we had to work through, so they had set up an antivirus, a new antivirus, not what they were using before, and an EDR solution and management servers for those two solutions. And then they put the agents on the box that they then handed to us to recover Active Directory to. So we had to go back to those management servers and say, yes, this process is exempt from your blockage, right? And that because those two products were new to them, it took time for them to figure out just how to reconfigure those properly so that we could run recovery. But yeah, I think that's a very important point, Brian. And it's a time to introduce things like that. And we even think, with some of the new features we've got in DRE, let's say you were ready to do a OS level upgrade on your DCs, and you got hit with ransomware, and you haven't really even started yet. Well, you might roll that OS upgrade right into phase two of your recovery, because all you'd have to do is promote one server, and then with the new OS, and then back that server up and use that as media to promote the rest of your servers, and you'd be all except for the first two machines that you restore from backup, you'd be on the new OS. So that's very flexible too. It's a great feature we've added to the product. So
Well, I also want to point out not every disaster is going to be a full disaster recovery. We have to change infrastructure, which kind of leads to some of the other stuff that I've been seeing in some different accounts, especially healthcare recently, which was like a password spraying attacks. I actually had one account not too long ago where they were doing some protection on like one account. So the password spray ended up getting up to their control plane, and all accounts were locked out except one. So they were able to use, Recovery Manager to restore some of those different passwords of the other different people, and they fought them back. But Mr. Heimer, I think you've seen this before in a couple of different accounts as well.
There's been about 4 that I've heard of, and I'm not, we have a lot of pre-sales people, so I don't hear about all of them. But there's been about 4 password spray style attacks, and it's very simple, 5 lines of code in PowerShell, and all you need is the right authority to reset passwords, and you can wreak havoc on an environment. So one of the unique things about Recovery Manager that you can't do natively is we can restore passwords from backup. That's not something Microsoft exposes. They think it's a security breach to expose that, and yet they keep the passwords on recycle bin objects. So a little bit of hypocriticalness there. We can, and I actually set up a lab. If you ever come to our experts conference, please come to our pre-con training beforehand. I build a lab with this very scenario that you can recover from, where every password in a forest has been scrambled. Nobody has a domain password they can log in with. How do you get back in? How do you regain control? How do you recover with a minimal impact to your end users? Because natively, you'd have to reset everybody's password again and then somehow hand out those new passwords. Hopefully, they're unique, right? They're not the same for everyone. And then say, oh, by the way, you've got to pick a new password when you log in next time because your old password's going to be in the stack, so you can't use it. So sorry about that. Have a nice day. Not a really good way to start the day, to have something like that. So.
And
Go
go ahead,
ahead, Bryan.
Joe. Oh, I
Oh,
was thinking about another example I remember recently, not
Oh
for a
yeah.
disaster, but like
Yeah, so there's a pharmacy retailer in Europe. I was just sitting down to watch a rerun of Star Wars, maybe Episode 4, and about 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and I get this call from our Singapore office, where support was on the line with this European office because they had a password spray attack against just their admin accounts. And unfortunately, they had made some bad decisions. And I don't know if this was from a consultant or if it was internal. They set their password lockout duration to 0. And what does that mean? It means nobody can unlock. I mean,
forever.
the account's not going to unlock. You have to have an
Yeah.
admin unlock the account, right? And then they also took the built-in administrator account, which is usually immune to that process, and they renamed it and moved it to a different OU and disabled the account. And nobody that I was on the phone with even knew the name that they had renamed it to. So they couldn't use the built-in administrator to get back in. So,
And
but
unintended consequences.
yeah. So I asked them 3 questions. I said, "Do you have Recovery Manager installed and are agents deployed?" And they said yes. And I said, "Do you have a forest recovery plan built, even if you're not using it? But do you have a forest recovery plan built for your forest?" And they said yes. And I said, "Do you know the local SAM administrator account for your Recovery Manager server? Not the domain account, the local SAM account." And they said yes to that. And I said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And it took me about 15 minutes to get them back in the door where they could unlock their other admin accounts. But it didn't take 15 minutes, because the consultant that was on the line kept on kind of taking over the conversation. So I'd say, "Hey, so log in with the regular account and go do this," and he'd start taking over, and I just kind of got quiet and let him lead him down the wrong path and got to a dead end. And I said, "Well, let's back up, right, and come back to here and do this." And he took over again and led him down the wrong path and got to a dead end. And I said, "Okay, well, let's back up again to here and let's move forward and do this next." And he started to take over again. And I said, "I got a question." I said, "Are you gonna take over the conversation again and lead them down the wrong path and get them to where they can't recover, or are you just going to be quiet so I can help get these guys back online?" And he went radio silent after that, to his credit. And yeah, from there it took about 12 minutes to get him back. Bryan, Patton.
Yeah, I was thinking about another one where I actually got a phone call and I didn't have any work to do, but it was more of just a thank you. And what ended up happening with this customer was their sysvol directory somehow got corrupted. So
Mm-hmm.
they initially tried to restore their sysvol to the PD simulator in hopes they would just replicate out, but it
Authoritatively,
was
yeah,
not.
that's what Microsoft's native restore is for Sysvol.
Yep.
Uh, It's not the first time I've seen this where somebody does that. And what was the result, Bryan?
They couldn't, so they end up using Recovery Manager and
Yeah.
restoring the
So
sysvol in HDC very
they,
quickly and had their weekend back.
yes, that's what they did. But they did recover natively. They did restore natively, and waited for replication. So I don't know if they went to lunch or something. 2 hours
Hmm.
later, they went and looked, and all of their Sysvol volumes were empty. It wasn't just that they were corrupt, right? That all the data was gone in Sysvol. So they said, well, that didn't work. Well, we bought this Quest thing. Let's try it. And we do something very different. We pick one server as the authoritative, but we restore Sysvol non-authoritatively on every DC at the same time. So you don't have to wait for replication. And every DC within minutes gets all the Sysvol data, logon scripts, group policy objects, gets all of that back in one easy stroke. So that's another unique feature. I don't know that anyone else in the forest recovery realm is doing that.
I still feel like the other likely scenario that you must test is restoring individual group policies as well. I've seen one group policy change cause havoc on an organization as they're trying to be more secure, but cause a lot of different damage. So I'm still seeing recovery manager being used quite often in that scenario.
Yeah, and it's something unique as well because the Active Directory recycle bin doesn't help you at all with group policy. It's not part of that recovery. So, yeah, real
There's
good
a
point,
lot of
Bryan.
scenarios, right? And Bryan, we talked about it earlier, but the ability to exercise these recovery plans with multiple scenarios and the ability to find people who can be sort of emotionally regulated in those incident moments. Like incident response is it's stressful, right? And so the ability to just sort of be clear-headed and not worry about, like you said, is this a resume generating event, what I'm about to say, in that moment, right? Because whatever is going on, you have to be able to sort of put that aside. And it's very difficult too. So it's good to be able to like I said, I like what we do because we have that ability to be sort of that reasoned, experienced voice on the phone. It's like, guys, just stay the course. This is how we can fix it. And we have all of those options that we can bring when it is time to fix, right?
Yeah, and Joe, and the fact that we have people awake 24/7, waiting for those calls, right? You set up a Sev1 ticket with us with this product, and you get a call back within an hour. And if those people, maybe we have more than one recovery going on, right? Maybe we have more than one client. Those people will bring in the experts that they need, and I know I'm one of the people that's on page. So,
Right.
so
I mean,
that can
technically,
happen.
they're not waiting, right? We page them, but still, yeah. It's the
No,
right
no,
call.
it's around. Yeah, well, you're talking about the experts, right? Our support team
Yeah.
is online 24/7, so they're
Support
always
team is
there,
there 24/7, and then they page the guys, the folks that are going to
right?
come in and do the
And
restoration.
I'm
I
one
just
of those.
like
But we have great
you're
experts in
watching
the
Star
PSO
Wars,
group.
man. You weren't just waiting.
So, so another scenario that we had a while ago was managed service provider that somehow their DNS zones for their clients
I was on that call.
were deleted, all of them,
Yeah, what ended up
and so they were
happening,
basically dead in the water.
Bryan, they
Go
did a
ahead,
little bit of
Bryan.
outsourcing. And there was literally a guy in India, they were US based, and he deleted a DNS zone. So even though it comes up like, hey, are you sure you really want to do this? I don't know if he was tired or whatever. He clicked yes. But they were down, all their customers were down, and we were very quickly able to restore it with the backup that we already had for anything that's AD integrated.
Yeah,
So you just
absolutely.
gotta think about the different relationships. If you're using like info blocks, whatever, that's not necessarily something you're gonna have to restore. Somebody else has to have that, but you definitely have to work how to coordinate with actually have to have DNS before you can do the restoration.
Yeah, and I've seen several. I mean, there's a lot of info blocks out there now. I see that, and I think Blue Cat. I see a lot that it's not it's not cut and dry. Every client I talk to is doing that a little bit differently. Maybe their DCs are still using 80 integrated DNS, but everything else is being forwarded off to Blue Cat or Infoblocks. The other scenario is application partitions, right? Maybe you've got a custom partition in your environment that you've added to the directory, or maybe you've got a schema extension that's a custom schema extension. We can restore those things too. Or maybe you want to do a forced functional level upgrade in your environment, and if it goes south, you need a backup plan. We can do that as well. We can do a forced recovery to backups from before you did the upgrade. So our product's very flexible. I can't think of an Active Directory recovery scenario as long as you've got your backups that that we can't handle with DRE. Well, Joe, Bryan, I really appreciate the chance to talk, and hopefully everyone that's listening really enjoys the conversation. If you have any extra questions, please get a hold of us. I'm sure we'll have a link here after the call.
And if you haven't already, document your recovery process and schedule a test of it for real.
Yeah, feel free to continue the conversation. We're all on LinkedIn. You can get a hold of our email addresses. We're happy to connect and helping you. You know, we wouldn't be anything if we didn't have our customers.
That's for sure. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day.